Church, when you're an emotional wreck and your physical body is breaking down before you, your emotions are just shattered, and you begin to see your relatives standing afar off from you, the very ones that love you the most, the ones that care about you the most. But what we find out is so many times it's not necessarily, as David writes, it's not necessarily that they moved away from him. Yes, in some cases, nobody wants to be around you when you're in the midst of something like that. But most times what we find out is we start to remove ourselves from people. We get into sin, we begin to move ourselves away from those that we love. Why? Because we know that they're going to figure it out. We know that they're going to catch on. We know that they're going to try to hold us accountable for things that are in our life. They love you. They care about you. And they want to help you. David's closest loved ones, his friends and relatives, wanted no part of his sin. And so it is with us, church. You see, sin causes us to fall away from our friends, to fall away from our families, to separate ourselves from us. Don't visit. We don't call them. They become distant to us, and we become distant to them. They don't want to be seen with us, and we don't want to be seen by anybody. We become very reclusive in every way, all because of some sin sickness. What do you got in your life you need to ditch? What do you got in your life you need to get rid of? Maybe it's affecting you physically. Maybe it's affecting your emotions. Maybe it's breaking down your relationships. Maybe all of that is just breaking down because of the sin that you've dragged up into your life. And again, God doesn't send it to us. We hunt it down. We're looking for it. Have you ever thought maybe you need to look more at God, not less at the world? You'll find what you're looking for. You know, I've never found, I don't know, maybe some of y'all can tell me, but I've never found one place in my life where sin filled up the hole I was trying to put it in. Never. It's always empty and it's always asking for more. The only time I found a true filling in my life was when I gave my life over to Jesus Christ and the salvation, and I began to fill my life up with things of God. Then I found a fulfilling relationship with Him. Well, sin affects us physically, it affects us emotionally, it affects us in fellowship with Him, to be a part of His life. And David understands that because of his sin, because of the very thing that God doesn't want him to have in his life, that his relationship and his closeness to God is being damaged. And he sees the magnitude of his sin. He sees the penalty of his sin and his actions. And so many people today feel that same distance from God because of sin. The feeling of being alone in the midst of being. The feeling of having people all around you, but yet you're isolated to yourself. Your sin is keeping you in a little prison. You see, God will remove himself from the presence of sin, which means he will remove himself from your presence if you're with him. Or if you're in sin, excuse me. And you will be left to the same misery as David. The same misery. You see, sin affects us spiritually. It affects us spiritually. Well, what does it do? Physically, we break down. Emotionally, we break down. Relationally, we break down. And spiritually, it separates us from God, which is the worst of all. Well, there is an antidote to this. There is a cure for it. What is that, preacher? Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to recognize that sin. We have to recognize it for what it is, and then we have to own that sin. We have to own it. Psalm 32 and verse 5 says this. He says, I acknowledge my sin to you, and my iniquity I have not hidden. I acknowledge my sin. That means that we recognize it and we own that sin. That's the tough part. We got to own it. We got to take responsibility for it. Listen, why don't you take responsibility for it? You committed it. It was good enough for you to commit. Maybe it's good enough for you to own it. That's hard, isn't it? That's very hard. But we got to take responsibility for it. I said to you, and my iniquity I have not hidden, my sin I have not hidden. Take responsibility for it. We committed it. We have to own it. Psalm 51 in verse 4 says this. He says, against you only have I sinned. Against God, only I have sinned. And done this evil in your sight. He recognized that he sinned against God. I don't